Um, Lesson 5.2. So we're going to talk about how the supply curve can shift right and shift left. First of all, there are determinants of supply and how those determinants affect the supply curve. And then contrast a movement along the supply curve with a shift in the supply curve. So supply curves indicate the price and variety of goods available to you, from the latest social network sites to the smartest phones. It's assumed constant along a supply curve. Assumed constant along a supply curve are the determinants of supply other than the goods price. So on a supply curve, the price can change, and that is it. No determinants are changing. But there are 5 determinants of supply that if they do change, the supply curve has to shift left or right. So a change in the determinants can cause the supply curve to shift. This contrasts with the change in price, which causes a movement along a supply curve. So our determinants. Each firm's curve is based on the cost of production and profit opportunities in the market. Anything that affects production and profit opportunities helps shape the supply curve. There are 5 determinants of market supply other than the price of the good. A change in the determinants shifts the supply curve. First of all, change in the cost of resources. Any change in the cost of resources used to make a good will affect the supply of the good. For example, suppose the cost of mozzarella cheese falls. This reduces the cost of making pizza. Producers are therefore willing and able to supply more pizza at each price. This is reflected by a rightward shift of the supply curve. After the shift, the quantity supplied is greater at each price. So I think if we look at this one right here, yep. So if the price of mozzarella cheese falls, this reduces the cost of making pizza. So producers are going to be more willing and able to supply more pizza at each price. So at $12, they used to make 24 million pizzas per week. But now at $12, they're going to make 28 million pizzas per week. The whole curve has to shift to the right. But what if there was an increase in the cost of a resource to make a pizza? This means that at every level of output, the cost of supplying the pizza increases. An increase in the cost of a resource will reduce the supply of pizza, meaning a leftward shift of the supply curve. For example, if the wage paid to pizza workers increases, the higher labor cost would increase the cost of production, so pizzas become less profitable. Higher production costs decrease supply, so the pizza supply shifts to the left. Producers supply less at each price. So for example, at $12, they used to supply 24 million pizzas per week, but now with the higher cost of labor, higher cost of production, they can only supply 20 million pizzas per week. Okay, the whole curve shifts to the left. They are able to produce less at each price than they could before the increase in production costs. Okay, changes in the price of other goods. Nearly all resources have alternative uses. The labor, building, machinery, ingredients, and knowledge needed to make pizza could produce other products. They can make breadsticks, calzones, rolls, and other baked goods. So a change in the price of another good these resources could produce affects the profit incentives of pizza makers. Let's talk about the rightward shift. A change in the price of another good these resources could make affects the opportunity cost of making pizza. For example, if the price of calzones falls, the opportunity cost of making pizza declines. These resources are not as profitable in their best alternative use, which is making calzones. So, pizza production becomes relatively more attractive. If calzones become cheaper, the pizza makers are going to want to make pizzas because they're making more profit. As some resources shift from baking calzones to making pizza, the supply of pizza increases or shifts to the right. As shown, let's see, I don't have it. So, it's just a basic graph, money, quantity. Okay, you have your original supply curve. Once you shift your resources away from making calzones to making pizza, your supply curve is going to shift to the right. Leftward shift. On the other hand, if the price of calzones increases, so does the opportunity cost of making pizza. Some pizza makers may bake more calzones and less pizza, so the supply of pizza decreases or shifts to the left. A change in the price of another good these resources could produce affects the profit incentives of pizza makers. Change in technology. Technology represents the economy's stock of knowledge about how to combine resources efficiently. Discoveries in chemistry, biology, electronics, and many other fields have created new products, improved existing products, and lowered the cost of production. For example, the first microprocessor, the Intel 4004, could execute about 400 computations per second when it hit the market in 1971. Today, a standard PC can handle more than 6 billion computations per second, or 15 million times what the Intel 4004 could handle. Technological change, in this case faster computers, lowers the cost of producing goods that involve computers, from automobile manufacturing to document processing. So along a given market supply curve, technological know-how is assumed to be unchanged. If better technology is discovered, the cost of production falls, making this market more profitable. Improvements in technology makes firms willing and able to supply more of a good at each price. So supply increases, and it would shift your supply curve to the right. A technological change, I can't think of one example that would shift a supply curve to the left. Or you just wouldn't change the technology, right? Change in producer expectations. Producers transform resources into goods they hope to sell for a profit. Any change that affects producer expectations about profitability can affect market supply. For example, if pizza makers expect the prices to increase in the future, some may expand their production capacity now. This would shift the supply of pizza rightward. So if they expect pizza prices to increase in the future, they're going to expand production now, so in the future they can make more pizzas, and that alone shifts the supply curve to the right. Expecting higher prices in the future may prompt some producers to reduce their current supply now while awaiting the higher price, especially on goods that can be easily stored, like oil. Crude oil can be left in the ground. Grain can be left in a silo. If they expect higher prices in the future, they're going to hold on to these things so in the future they have them to sell. This would shift the current supply curve to the left, and then the future supply curve will shift to the right. A change in the number of suppliers. Any change in the market environment also can affect the number of suppliers in the market. To explain this best would be by an example, and government regulations are the greatest example. So government regulations may influence market supply. As a case in point, for decades, governments strictly regulated the prices and entry of new firms in a variety of industries, including airlines, trucking, and telecommunications. During that time, The number of firms in each market was artificially limited by these government restrictions. When these restrictions were eased, more firms entered these markets, increasing supply. More generally, all government action that affects a market's profitability, such as a change in business taxes, could shift the supply curve. Lower taxes on a particular industry will attract more firms to the market, thereby increasing supply. Higher taxes will have the opposite effect. That was a lot of words, but it does the best job of explaining the change in number of suppliers. If governments reduce their restrictions, more suppliers enter the market, and the curve is going to shift to the right. If government regulations tighten up, more firms are going to leave the market, and the supply curve will shift to the left. And I just did that. Okay, learning objective 2, movement along a supply curve versus a shift of the supply curve. This is just like demand. Oh goodness, why is that stuck there? There we go. A change in price, other things constant, causes movement along a supply curve from one price quantity combination to another. So if I draw a curve, got price here, quantity there. So if price changes, I'm not very good at drawing those. If price changes, we're going to move up and down the curve. So as price goes up, our quantity goes up. We're moving up and down the same curve. So if you ever get a question in your homework or a test that talks about change in price, you're just moving along a curve. Okay, you're not shifting left or right. So if we have a supply curve and one of the determinants changes, that is going to cause a shift to the right, oh gosh, or a shift to the left. So changes in determinants, and they result in shifts. Changes in prices result in movements along. And that will be in your playlist.